This is Russell Dobular sitting in for Jimmy Dore, who will be in Denver on May 11th. Go to jimmydore.com for tickets. All right, so maybe we're going a little too hard on the chosen people's nation because they're giving a very generous offer, apparently, to Hamas. Blinken has urged Hamas to accept new Israeli terms for hostage release and ceasefire. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said today at the World Economic Forum in Riyadh that Israel has given a very generous hostage deal proposal that could lead to a ceasefire in Gaza and urged Hamas to accept it soon. White House officials say they are extremely focused on getting a deal and that the war in Gaza is a major obstacle for the Biden administration's broader post-war strategy in the region. The administration is especially concerned about a mega deal with Saudi Arabia that could include normalizing relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Blinken said ending the war in Gaza and laying a path for a Palestinian state is the missing part of the effort to reach the mega deal. Israel in recent days presented a new hostage deal proposal to Hamas through Egyptian mediators that includes a willingness to discuss restoring sustainable calm to Gaza, hinting Israel is open to talking about ending the war. A Hamas delegation will arrive in Cairo on Monday to discuss the details of the proposal and deliver a response. Quote, "We hope Hamas will make the right decision," Blinken said in Saudi Arabia. Israel is threatening to move forward with an invasion of Rafah if Hamas rejects the proposal. More than 1 million displaced Palestinians are taking shelter in the southern Gaza city. President Biden told Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu during a phone call on Sunday that the onus is on Hamas to accept the recent hostage deal proposal, a source with knowledge of the call said. Okay, so this is the Quds News Network. During his speech at the WEF in Riyadh, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken describes an Israeli offer of a temporary ceasefire to Hamas as extraordinarily generous. According to UK Foreign Secretary David Cameron, Israel has offered Hamas only a 40-day ceasefire in order to exchange Israeli detainees. Israel asserted to Egypt that they will not stop the war as Hamas insists, and urged to continue to attack Rafah. All right, so let's see what he had to say here.
Hamas has before it a proposal that is extraordinarily generous on the part of Israel. And in this moment, the only thing standing between the people of Gaza and a ceasefire is Hamas. Oh, Jesus. They have to decide, and they have to decide quickly.
Okay, so this is a reaction. The deal only hints at the possibility of a permanent ceasefire and that Israel is open to talking about ending the war. So Blinken wants Hamas to turn over their only bargaining leverage for a hint that Israel is open to talking about ending the war. What a joke. Now, as we mentioned before, let's not forget Israel was funding Hamas until they weren't. So, Max, I mean, based on previous history, my reading of this is they're setting up a pretense to justify the brutal genocidal campaign they're about to wage in Rafah. They made an offer to Hamas that they have to refuse. And then when they refuse it, they're going to say, well, see, Israel made a very generous offer. Look how he's trying to pump this up when clearly, if you look at the details, it's anything but.
Yeah, that's what Bill Clinton did to the Palestinian Authority and Arafat at Camp David 99-2000. And it was used to paint the Palestinians and Arafat as rejectionists when they were offered the fakest hologram of a state possible, to paint them as rejectionists in order to justify Israel's brutal repression during the Second Intifada. Bill Clinton's still out there blaming them for that. Right. So this is a tried and true tactic. Blinken is the sort of ideological heir of the foreign policy team of Bill Clinton. and he's using this tactic. I made you a very generous offer. It sounds like he sounds like a mafia don.
Right.
And if they fail to accept the offer, then the U.S. will give Israel full-throated support to go into Rafah, where there's still 1.2, 1.5 million people huddled in tents with nowhere to go. And it will be used to justify the massacre and blame it on Hamas. Why did October 7th happen? Do you think that Hamas would have enacted such a daring and brazen operation if they were willing to accept going back to the status quo of before October 7th, when Gaza was under siege, when there was just simply no economy, 30% unemployment, 40% unemployment? I mean, I've been to Gaza during a time of quote unquote peace, and it's pretty depressing to see people live under conditions where they have 4 hours of electricity. The sewage system's completely destroyed from previous Israeli bombardments.
You went to Gaza?
I've been to Gaza twice, and I was there during the 2014 assault when Israel was heavily bombing.
Hang on, but your head is still attached to your shoulders. Juliana Margulies assures people that if you go to Gaza, they're going to play with your head like a soccer ball. They didn't play with your head like a soccer ball?
No, they didn't play with my head like a soccer ball, and it was pretty well known that I was Jewish. My roommates' last names were Cohen and Rosenfeld, and we had to give our names to the Hamas German. Interior. As soon as we got to our room where we were renting, we gave our names to the building manager, who then gives our names to the Hamas Interior Ministry. And they knew we were there, and we were in no way harmed. In any case, so Blinken said the real goal, he's feeding this to Axios. He's the source of the Axios reporter, Barak Ravid. He's feeding this to them. Our real agenda here is to restore peace and quiet to Gaza so that we can have the deal of the century, normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia, which is the wet dream of Benjamin Netanyahu.
Right.
It means that Israel normalizes relations with the leading Arab power, and Palestinians are placed in the icebox of history. Joe Biden himself, just like 2 months ago, acknowledged that one reason October 7th happened was because of the moves being made to normalize relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel, which would have just doomed the Palestinians, taken their whole issue of statehood or sovereignty completely off the table. So they're still moving towards that. Why would any Palestinian faction accept that? The reality is they won't. Hamas is not going to accept going back to the way things were before October 7th. What they want is a unity government. They want major security prisoners released who were jailed during the Second Intifada, who are figures with massive credibility who don't represent Hamas. They actually represent other factions, including the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which is a left-wing Marxist faction, as well as Marwan Barghouti, who is a very credible figure. At least he has credibility among Palestinians popularly, unlike Mahmoud Abbas, the leader of the PA. Hamas doesn't want to govern anymore under siege. They want a real unity government, and they want to move towards sovereignty. So they're not going to do something as daring and brazen as October 7th without demanding a major change in the status quo. And what the U.S. is offering them is the status quo, which means that this war, I could potentially see this war or some version of it continuing through the rest of the year.
Now, I think I'm very naive about the Arab states in this region, because when this genocidal campaign against the Palestinians began, early on, Iran seemed to try to get a coalition together to fight on behalf of the Palestinians. And no one was interested, from what I was reading. And it's really remarkable to me that even in the midst of this, a deal like that would even be on the table for the Saudis. Now, I am assuming this is a case of the people's will is just completely repressed, because I can't imagine the people in these countries, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, don't want to go in and fight on behalf of the Palestinians. Can you explain a little bit about the politics of that region? why nobody has moved to defend the Palestinians?
Well, prior to 1979, the leader of the Arab world was Egypt. This is a country of some 80 million with a civilization that dates back thousands of years. And under Gamal Abdel Nasser, who came into power through a popular military coup, Egypt not only fended off an attack by the French, British, and Israelis in 1956, they enacted a massive program of social change, literacy programs, nationalized the Suez Canal and powered their economy. And they were sponsoring armed resistance in the Gaza Strip and supporting Palestine on the international scene. And so Israel attempts to crush them in 1967, attacks them, wins this war, occupies the Sinai Peninsula. Egypt comes back and takes back the Sinai Peninsula in a surprise attack on Israel, the Yom Kippur War. They screw over Syria, which is the other independent Arab power that was not pro-US at the time. And they get to be the sole negotiator. They negotiate the Camp David Accords. And basically, under Anwar Sadat, they sell out to the United States. Sadat is promptly assassinated by the opposition, the Muslim Brotherhood, for that betrayal of the Egyptian people who support Palestinians. But today, the military junta of Egypt, which is enriched and made billionaires through the Camp David Accords, controls the country's economy, controls the country against the will of much of the population that wants to see Palestine be supported. Egypt is also in deep debt. Its currency is heavily devalued. It has very little room to maneuver against Israel or the United States. And it's the same with Jordan, which is basically a human warehouse for Palestinian refugees. The majority of the population of Jordan are Palestinians. They're protesting right now, but there's nothing they can do because they have this Hashemite king who's half British, who's just a tool of the West, who actually helped Israel shoot down Iranian ballistic missiles when Iran counterattacked. So Jordan and the people of Jordan who are Palestinian, I mean, it's basically an extension of Palestine. They have no voice. They're under the control of a massive security state that collaborates with Israel. And then you have Turkey. The population of Turkey is strongly supportive of Palestinian resistance. Erdogan, the president, who's extremely popular there, he's all talk. He's spoken very strongly in support of the Palestinian resistance, but there's nothing he can do because Turkey is a NATO partner. Turkey has crushing debt, owes enormous amounts to the IMF. Their economy can be brought to the ground with a flick of a switch by the United States if it angers Israel. So there's very little that Erdogan can do. In fact, the Turkish government is holding the Gaza flotilla in port on behalf of the United States and Israel. It's really pathetic. So Iran is left, along with its allies, many of whom are technically non-state actors like Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. You have the factions in Gaza that get some logistical support from Iran. And then you have the de facto government of Yemen, Ansar Allah, the so-called Houthis, who have withstood a Saudi, US, British siege for 8 years. Brutal attacks. It was for years the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. And they are mounting a successful naval siege of the Red Sea in support of the Palestinians, basically carrying out a true responsibility to protect humanitarian intervention against genocide. And so the Palestinians are Sunni Arabs. And when you're in the Gaza Strip, the one thing you'll always hear Palestinians say after there's a massacre, they won't say, death to Israel necessarily. They will say, where are the Arabs? Right. And they feel totally abandoned by the Arabs and we haven't even talked about the sellout monarchies. I mean, no one expects anything of them. They've just been planted there by the British and the Americans. So they say, where are the Arabs? And they understand that their only allies are actually among the Shia.
The Shia, right.
This is not a sectarian situation. And we haven't even talked about Syria, by the way. Syria was the last Arab state standing. The last Arab states standing because of the Assad family being in control. Hafez al-Assad, Bashar's father, had always maintained a strong alliance with Iran, tried to maintain an alliance with Egypt. We talked about how he was screwed over. So as soon as the Arab Spring begins, the US, the British, and the Turks and the Gulf states all team up on Syria. They inflame sectarianism, they pump in hateful propaganda, and then they begin arming the so-called moderate rebels who are sectarian Sunni, who want to massacre the Alawites, which are represented by Assad and his family.
Right.
And they reduce the Syrian state to a series of kind of cantons, some of which are controlled by jihadists, some of which are controlled by the government. Today, northwestern Syria is de facto under the control of NATO, and the remnants of Al-Qaeda are there, being maintained by NATO. Technically it's not a state, but it's effectively a NATO jihadi state. And so that's what Syria is facing. So Syria can do very little to resist. And the most they can do is allow the IRGC, Iran's most ideologically, Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps to operate on its soil, which is why we see so many Israeli attacks on Syria. But the Syrian army is pretty much powerless to respond. So the Palestinians have been basically left alone here. And it's actually heroic that they've been willing to stand up and fight the most powerful military, not only in the Middle East, but one of the most powerful militaries in the world with nothing but homemade weapons.
Well, that's something Zionists will always throw out. Where are the Arabs? And you've just explained.
Where are the Arabs? They're in your back pocket.
Yes, you've explained that very thoroughly.
Hey, come see us do a live show. We're going to be in Denver, Colorado, May 11th. Los Angeles, California, doing a live panel show with a celebrity panel and video. Ashland, Virginia, Athens, Georgia, Rutherford, New Jersey, with Max Blumenthal. Minneapolis, Minnesota, Ontario, California, Irvine, California, Chicago, Illinois, with another celebrity panel, live video show in Chicago, and Grand Rapids, Michigan. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets. jimmydore.com for a link for tickets.